Welcome to True Crime 101 with Murder Friends. 3 friends from 3 different countries who talk about murder. My name's Alana and I'm Canadian.
Hi, I'm Anna and I'm American.
My name's Hannah and I'm British.
In addition to our longer episodes, True Crime 101 takes you through key true crime cases and theories. So this time on True Crime 101, I wanted to talk about the Greyhound Bus murder, which happened in Canada in 2008. Canada is not always the most exciting for crimes. Let's just say that right now. Not the most exciting. Unfortunately, this one, I think, makes up for our lack of big media coverage.
I think you're going
crimes.
for like quality rather than quantity.
Yeah, I got a lot of my information from the Fifth Estate TV show, which is like a Canadian investigative kind of news show. So I got a lot from that episode on this crime, and to be honest, I had to watch it in 2 parts because I felt very sick. I felt sick, and this is my disclaimer. So
This is one of the darker stories.
this is a dark story. I feel so bad, but
I actually don't know anything about it, I don't think. I might when she starts talking about it. I don't.
The gist of it.
okay.
I don't think I really know about it.
Are you okay?
Okay, so back in 2008 in Canada, we have this bus service called Greyhound, and it's basically a really cheap.
We have them in America too.
Yeah, really cheap, gets you pretty much anywhere. Canada doesn't really have a lot of trains like the UK does, so if you can't drive, you're kind of stuck with a Greyhound. And essentially the story starts in 2008. We have Tim McLean, who is a 22-year-old carny, essentially. He works with like traveling fairs. So he travels a lot, and he's just sort of kind of figuring out what he wants to do with his life and where he wants to be, and he's this like free spirit traveler kind of guy, and he decides he's gonna head home to Winnipeg in Manitoba, and then he thinks he's going to move permanently to British Columbia and like start his life, and it's all very like uplifting and exciting, of course. What's really upsetting, his friends offered to pay for a plane ticket, but he declined because he was fine taking the bus. And we're talking an 18-hour bus trip. Like, Canada is big. So rather than take, an hour plane.
18 hours.
Yeah.
That's rough.
And that's not even, he's going from, I believe it's from Edmonton to Winnipeg, and they are relatively close to each other in the grand scheme of things in Canada.
Wow.
So 18-hour bus ticket. He says no to a plane. He just doesn't want to take that kind of stuff from his friends. So he gets on bus 1170. Now we meet Vincent Lee. He's 40 years old. He is really well educated in China, but when he comes over to live in Canada, he can only really get low paying jobs. Most recently, he was like a newspaper delivery guy. In 2005, he's diagnosed with schizophrenia, but is left untreated, which comes into play, as you can imagine, in the crime. And there's a lot of conversation about, someone is diagnosed and then essentially left to deal with it himself when obviously he's not in a state to deal with it. So basically, Vincent says he hears the voice of God in his head telling him what to do. And as you can imagine, God doesn't sound like a nice man in this guy's head.
Oh dear.
So God is basically telling him, Vincent, buddy, your life is in danger. Somebody's gonna come for you, essentially, and you need to protect yourself. So Vincent buys a hunting knife at good old Canadian Tire, which I'm not really sure what the equivalent would be here in England. It's like B&Q, I guess.
Okay.
Like a hardware store.
Yeah, like Lowe's in the
Lowe's,
US,
yeah,
like Home Depot.
Home Depot, yeah. Basically, he goes in. He is given a hunting knife, like a real heavy duty hunting knife.
Like a big
Oh, a big boy. Big boy. Puts out in his old backpack, and he gets on the Greyhound bus. Vincent has some sort of erratic behavior, as we can imagine. He's on this bus. He decides to get off at one point. He sits on a park bench outside of a gas station all day and all night, just sort of waiting to see for something to happen. It's not really clear what he's thinking. At some point, God tells him he needs to get back on the bus, and he boards bus 1170. So he's sitting at the front by himself, pretty much keeps to himself. He is not a violent guy. He hasn't had any violations in the past. He hasn't been arrested, that sort of thing. He's just quietly sitting on the bus near the front. Now, our guy Tim is asleep. He's in the second last row. As you can imagine, on an 18-hour bus ride, people are pretty much keeping to themselves, sleeping. You're kind of like listening to your MP3 player, you know, whatever, your iPod if you're rich, but you're on a Greyhound, so maybe not. So after a pit stop, because basically on these Greyhounds, they only stop really short periods of time. So after a pit stop, Vincent decides that he's going to sit beside Tim, and Tim is still asleep against the window. So they're at the back of the bus. Tim is against the window. Vincent's sitting on the aisle. Passengers who were interviewed after the fact said that Vincent was like rocking back and forth and potentially chanting in a language they didn't know. And it was just kind of like really strange behavior, but nobody really knew, like, what do you do in that situation? Do you just like leave him, which is what everybody did, and they just left him, because this is, at this point, I think it's in the middle of the night. People are just trying to keep to themselves. So then all of a sudden God tells Vincent that he needs to kill Tim because Tim is a threat to him. So, disclaimer.
As soon as you took that deep in breath, like I tried to cover my own neck up with my own shoulders and pants.
It's honestly one of the scariest situations I can imagine, because when I first moved to England from Canada, I used to have to take the bus all the time because I couldn't drive. I couldn't afford car insurance, and the idea that somebody would attack you like a stranger on a bus is like one of the scariest things I could ever think of. So, okay, here we go. Let's do this. Okay, so Vincent obviously takes out his hunting knife and just begins stabbing Tim, just like going for it. And everybody is, as you can imagine, really shocked. Like, people don't really know how to react.
Especially you would freeze in that situation.
That situation. Well, it's the same situation when you see like the terrorist incidents that happened in the UK, where the guys like crashed their van and then
the one in
ran out. Borough Market, where they ran out and they started attacking people. But you're so like, is
this happening?
Is this happening? I wonder how long it actually takes you for your like brain to catch up with what's actually sort of going on. Like, how would you react? And would you just think, my God, save me? Like, you would just be scared, or would you try to like get him off of him, sort of thing?
So from the interviews of people that were on the bus, basically everybody starts, after a period of shock, everybody's basically screaming for the bus to stop, because they're on the highway at this point. They're in the middle of nowhere, in the dark, all the lights are off. You're kind of like hearing what's happening. So the bus pulls over and everybody's literally piling over each other to get out. And there are even people on the bus behind their row, because they weren't at the very back. So people are like literally trying to climb over the scene that's happening just to get off and stand on the side of the road, essentially. And they interview this truck driver who actually pulls over. He can see everybody is like panicking, something's happening. So he actually pulls over and gets a big metal bar from his truck and gets on the bus, because he's trying to help, which, I mean, God bless him. I don't think there's many people...
doesn't even know what he's getting into. He's just like, get me a pipe.
Get me a pipe and get on the bus.
I can fix this situation.
And he said he confronts Vincent on the bus, and Vincent is literally expressionless. Like, there's nothing happening there. Unfortunately, Tim, at this point, is very much dead in the aisle of this bus. Everybody else is off, so they're just sort of standing looking at Vincent. Vincent then begins to, the nicest way to put this, decapitating Tim in front of this truck driver. Like, just emotionless. There's not, like, a hatred involved. It's literally just, like, a robot. And this poor man, pretty much everybody involved in this case has severe PTSD, as you can imagine. Vincent is then, doing that. The truck driver is frozen. I think anybody would be. And Vincent essentially walks towards him with a knife in one hand and
don't say that.
in the other. And they basically back off of the bus and they use the pipe thing to barricade.
I was going to say, I think at that stage, if there's nothing you could do to save the victim, I think I would just... You back off. Keep him on the bus till the police get there at that stage. Because you can't save... Yeah, at that point, let's detain.
Yeah, everybody's traumatized. At this point, I had to stop watching the episode because it's unimaginable and it's so random. There is no reason. This isn't like a grudge happening. This isn't like a prior thing. It's literally just a very ill man, basically.
Yeah.
So they barricade him on the bus. Unfortunately, all the passengers on the road can see everything that's happening. When they interview Vincent later, Vincent says that God tells him that you are still not safe and this man is going to come back to life unless you continue. So things happen, which I really wish they hadn't said in the documentary, and I'm not going to say now because it's just too horrific. But what essentially ends up happening is the RCMP, which is the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, arrive. They don't know what to do at this point because Vincent is doing things in the bus. People are very freaked out. And the RCMP wait for 4 hours. They stay outside the bus, just essentially watching. And they, you can actually hear recordings of them talking about what's happening. They're basically like live streaming it to each other. And they call him Badger. And they say, okay, Badger's at the front of the bus doing this, and Badger, whatever. And after 4 hours, Vincent then tries to jump out one of the windows, and then he is finally arrested. But he had been on the bus at that point for about 5 hours, which a lot of people were really upset about. Like, why wouldn't you just take him out either violently or non-violently? But I think a lot of people were so traumatized. It was like, I don't know what to do.
Did they try and negotiate with him more?
No. They just let him stay on the bus, basically. So Tim's ID was kept secret, and so his family actually saw the story on the news, but they didn't realize that it was him or that he was on that bus. And I actually remember them reporting this because this was the biggest story on just a regular old Greyhound bus in Canada. We've all taken them. It was massive news. And things like this, it's kind of cliche to say, things like this don't really happen in Canada, at least not something this current or this horrific. But basically, they put Vincent into a psych evaluation. He accepts responsibility, and he was actually angry that there is no death penalty in Canada because he was expecting to be executed, basically. He was asking them, are you going to execute me? When is that going to happen? I expect that's but of course, that we don't do that in Canada. And he actually got upset that there's no death penalty because that's just what he thought would happen.
It's obviously he just has severe mental illness.
Yeah.
It's so sad.
So he is in the psych hospital for quite a long time. They do a mental diagnosis, and they find that he cannot be held criminally responsible because obviously his schizophrenia was so out of control. And rather than any criminal record, he is put in a facility, basically. And he is in there getting therapy, the right drugs, all that kind of stuff for about 10 years. 9 years or so. In 2017, Vincent is given absolute discharge. The review board believes he poses no threat to the public. He changes his name. He is out. He has no restrictions. He has no check-ins with any sort of parole.
So he's out now.
He's out.
No check-ins at all. No mental health check-ins.
No, and no criminal record. So he's got a new name. People obviously don't know where he is. So he changed his name to Will Lee Baker, which they actually released, which was a little bit surprising.
Yeah, what's the point in changing your name then?
But the whole point that people really latched onto this case is it okay if someone seems to be rehabilitated for a mental illness that caused the crime or provoked the crime, is it okay for them to then be let out? Do you know what I mean? Like, he's gone now, he's out, everybody is not exactly thrilled. Obviously, the impact, one of the first RCMPs on the scene committed suicide. Yeah, not like heavy stuff. Some of there was one report, a woman who was on the bus when all this happened, she actually lost custody of her child because her PTSD was so severe afterwards. So, he's rehabilitated,
not to mention
unquote.
The family.
Tim's family.
I don't know. I think.
What do you do?
I think that there's crazy that there's no sort of, like, what if he just stops taking his medication one day? Yeah. Like, if there's no one monitoring him, I feel like that is not normal, even for somebody who's schizophrenic to have that sort of behavior. That is really extreme.
That's surprising that he doesn't have any sort of check-in, no parole type check-in.
Yeah, he was given an absolute discharge. Yeah, some people were saying, okay, if you obviously we don't want to put everybody in prison and we want to rehabilitate people who can be rehabilitated, but then to let them out fully, is that okay? The review board said that he posed no risk to the public.
If he has been in a mental health facility for 10 years, though, that's a very long time to be in a mental health facility, receiving treatment and everything. But I would have thought there would have been a check-in.
I guess you just worry that one day he'd just quit taking his medication and something horrible would happen. Yeah, like, because there's no one looking out for him.
It could happen. It could not happen, but it's better sorry, isn't it?
Who he's not been charged with anything, so he wouldn't fall under going on parole.
No, he's got no criminal record.
You feel like there should be some condition where he has his doctor, and maybe, I don't know. It's hard because I kind of, the mental illness isn't his fault. That is, if he had cancer, or if he had a broken leg, that's different. But, it just seems crazy that they wouldn't sort of find a way to monitor it.
Yeah. The story blew up. Obviously, when it first happened, people were traumatized and really shocked that something so horrific could happen. And then the fact that, okay, remember when that really big story broke? Well, now he's out and he's free to do whatever he needs to do, sort of thing. And a lot of people were upset. And then that sort of started this big conversation in Canada about rehabilitation and mental illness and whether somebody who commits such a heinous crime like that should get the opportunity to be out again. Heavy stuff.
It is heavy.
I don't think there's an answer to that, is there? Really?
No. I don't know. Do you think people like that should... that's the fine line. Like, I know personally, like, certain drug charges, like in the US, people can, it can be a drug charge and they're in prison for 20 years or something, which is non-violent. I think it's different between violent and non-violent crimes. I think... Because you'd think, before they decided to release him, was there like a hearing? Was there like a victim impact, like where they would read what the impacts made over the last 10 years? And I
think over the years there were different restrictions lifted. So at one point he was allowed to go out during the day, certain days of the week, and then later on he was allowed to live in a separate housing place,
sort of like housing facility.
Yeah. And then on top of that, a few years later, then he was allowed more travel, and then so this was kind of like the final step. Okay, he's got this far, he's completed these sort of phases, he's quote unquote cured, or at least
he's managing
mm-hmm. And now we aren't going to keep him anymore. He's going to do what he has to do.
I guess they're the professionals, they know. Yeah. I guess you have to trust in that they know what they're doing.
I hope so.
I hope so too. But just in case, like, don't take a Greyhound when you go visit, okay?
Yeah, Greyhound got
definitely flight tickets anytime.
Yeah, it definitely got a different vibe after that, and even still to this day, I think the killing of Tim on the Greyhound bus is one of Canada's worst crimes.
Absolutely.
So please sleep well tonight.
Yeah.
She's like, night, guys.
Yeah, I hope you're not listening to this on a bus.